Are you avoiding that difficult conversation with your aging parent about their future care plan? Or maybe you're wondering if they'll be able to stay at home or if assisted living might be a better fit. Or maybe you're feeling lost and unsure what support and resources are even available. If any of that sounds familiar, know that you're not alone. Navigating senior care feels overwhelming. And that's exactly what we're talking about in today's episode with our guest, Amy Friesen. Amy is a leading voice in senior living and elder care with over 20 years of experience guiding families through these very questions. She's the founder of Tea and Toast, an award-winning company known for its compassionate, personalized approach to helping families find the right senior living solutions. And she's also the author of the book Bread Crumbs, From Home Care to Care Homes, a practical and heartfelt guide that empowers families to make informed decisions, navigate complex systems, and create a supportive environment for their loved ones. Amy and I connected deeply over our shared heart led and holistic approach to this work. And I love how she's helping families not only make confident choices today, but also plan for a future that truly honors their loved ones' dignity and well being. I'm grateful to have her here with us. Let's dive in. Amy Friesen, welcome to the Legacy of Love podcast. I'm so happy you're here with me.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, so as we start off this conversation, I would love to hear what originally brought you to this work, to, helping people and helping families through, this real big transition. I mean, off recording, I was sharing with Amy that I find this piece to be the hardest piece in supporting clients and families through the transition of going from home to, some sort of assisted living and care.
hmm
So I'm sure that's a interesting story.
Well, and I found that too, right? I watched people struggle for almost 10 years while working in marketing at different residences, retirement homes. And I just found the same thing, family after family. Either they were coming to me because they could see me from their house, and therefore it was the same area, and the services all fit and everything worked together, or they really had no idea what they were looking for. They didn't even know what budget they were looking for. And it was just getting a lot more complicated than I felt like it needed to be. I mean, with anything, there is a learning curve. I mean, that's why brokers exist in insurance and finance and different, like, mortgages and stuff like that. It's because it's a select skill set that we can make our lives easier at each of those. And so I looked at that model and I thought, why not develop something that's a specialty where we could take families through the journey, but they actually have someone with them that understands and knows what's going on in the industry so that they don't feel like they're just going by the seat of their pants, or they don't feel like they need to take on the learning of this entire industry as a whole second job just to find it and then get rid of that knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, that's so helpful. And unfortunately, what I find is more times than not, people are not proactive in this area.
Most
Uh,
times.
right?
Yeah.
And I can even just use my family story as an example. Both of my grandparents, were aging in place at home. My grandfather really became the primary caregiver to my grandmother once she got the formal diagnosis of Alzheimer's. And he was so exhausted, for the years of caretaking to her. There was a lot of power struggles. I even went out there. I would go out there for like 2 weeks at a time, several rounds, my mom as well. And where things really changed and when my grandma moved and left the house, she had a fall and she broke her pelvis. And then that, then transitioned to rehab and then moving to assisted living facility because it became clear her needs were just so much greater than what he could provide. And even with that story, my grandfather, once he had really kind of the space to not be burdened with taking care of her, I mean, Amy, I'm sure you've seen this, but he actually declined significantly, and then he passed away in a matter of like 2 months. And I felt like it was so connected to, their marriage and him just knowing that she was supported and cared for, and he no longer had to be that person, all person. So, anyways,
Well, and I was a little worried you were going to say that. I'm sorry to hear that as well,
yeah.
but it tends to happen more often. And we always talk to caregivers and families about planning because they don't realize how much of a struggle it is to be in caregiver burnout, how much of a struggle it is to plan and make decisions that are very important decisions about care and health while or like during a crisis, right?
Yeah.
And so they just don't realize it, and everybody kind of puts it off. And then they kind of end up in that kind of pot of people that either they pass away or they have to go and get care themselves or a couple of different ways, right? And it's really sad to see.
So are you finding more times than not people are working with you proactively, or it's more of that kind of scenario that we we just painted of my family situation?
Yeah, I wish. I mean, we have a consulting kind of package for pre-planning because what
Hmm.
I find is a lot of people that don't want to do it or their loved one won't talk to the kids about it, for instance. It's
Yeah.
more often than not that they either have an idea of what nursing homes of like the 60s used to be. They had a
Hmm.
grandma there or whatever that experience was, and it was awful. And then they said, no, thank you. Or they just don't really understand what's available to them. And so educating them on how things work in the system, educating them on, wait lists and how that works and qualifications and public versus private retirement homes and long-term care, all of that stuff. What I find is after we do that, it does loosen them up for more of a conversation.
So Amy, you're based in Canada, right?
I am.
And
Yes.
I'm based in the United States. So I'm curious, what is your territory? You're able to serve the US, or you primarily focus in Canada? At least in the United States, for the most part, when we're talking about care, it is private pay unless people already had a long-term care insurance policy in place. Already
Hmm.
from this conversation, it sounds like things might be a similar setup in Canada. I think that the only alternative is skilled nursing facilities, and then in California, it's Medi-Cal. Medicaid would then, kick in and pay, but that's only for people that don't have funds. That, anyways, now I'm going down a rabbit hole where I'm like, that requirement just changed in California, but again, we do things differently here.
I feel like I've had multiple conversations with folks in the States and around our similarities because honestly, we have family and senior, and sometimes they're not in the same country, right? I have a lot of caregivers whose loved one is in Ottawa or Canada in general. And so the
Um,
cross border comes in a lot more often. As for comparables, I feel like your skilled nursing is like our long-term care, where it's subsidized. You have to pay some, but it's subsidized. Whereas retirement homes or assisted living, where you are in that
mhm.
bucket, is all private pay.
Okay, so yes, that does sound similar. Yeah.
Yeah, and it can range too. Like it can range substantially based on what the home is, where you are, what the care needs are. It's the same type of data that's happening. It just needs to be customized to wherever that family is looking, right? And have a look with that. So it can be complicated and there's a lot of moving pieces, but especially for my folks that have loved ones here and they're all over the world, right? We get calls all over the world to say,
Wow.
can you help my mom? She's there and I can't be there. We're doing virtual tours. We're doing the whole thing because the healthcare systems are different in different countries.
Wow, that's a lot. Okay, so then that goes perfectly into, let's just start talking about your company, Tea and Toast, and really the services that you're providing to families, what the setup is with your business, because I would love to know more. Already hearing about that you're serving internationally is impressive. So,
Thank you. Well, and we specialize in elder care planning and retirement search as well as long-term care navigating. So we are an educational source for all of our clients. That's how I built my business. We do actively help them figure out which retirement residence or long-term care homes would benefit them the best based on current care based on what we might be looking at down the way, such as dementia or
Hmm.
Parkinson's or anything like that, that changes the care profile significantly. We try to build all of that in. But to your point as well, the way that our business works, besides our elder care planning and whatnot, that can be virtually, it's very localized. And so I put together a group of elder care planners across Canada. And so I have
Wow.
sister businesses, I guess you call, that are colleagues of mine all across Canada. So we can service as many people as possible and give help to. So I have, colleagues also in the West,
Wow.
that can help depending on what people need. So they're all across because we all do similar, but a little bit tailored to our own location. But we're all kind of helping in elder care the best way we can help in whatever our locations are kind of asking for, because everything's just a little bit different.
I mean, everything is. So I think, speaking to kind of our, to our families, especially, the adult children that are supporting an aging parent and knowing that maybe if they're not in a crisis, that they can anticipate that this might become part of their future. What are things for people to really know about care and making this transition from home? What I find with families is there's just typically so much resistance to even considering leaving the house. Like priority is staying at home. And I support a lot of clients with that, but that's not always I think the best fit. I'm finding more so the cost of care is so expensive. So once we're looking at 24/7 care, even for larger estates, if the lifespan is still quite long, you could deplete an estate. So it's really, kind of weighing, is this what's best for the client? I had a client a few years ago and her cost of care was literally seven figures and
That's a lot. That's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah, it was crazy. It was absolutely crazy. So yes, kind of going back to you and kind of speaking to to families, like what are some of the things that we should kind of keep top of mind, knowing that this might be something that's in the near future for families.
I think that from a family perspective, adult children or whatnot, I think some of the things that need to be kept of mind is, you know, are all of the legal documents in order, right? Like, do we have powers of attorneys? Wills, yes, we need will as well, but that's after death. And so really, there's a lot of people who don't have a power of attorney because, for
Yeah.
instance, in your grandma's circumstance, right? Once you get down the road far enough with dementia, Alzheimer's, or anything under the dementia umbrella, you may be deemed incompetent to make decisions. And once that happens and the POA is not there, it's not going to be there. And then there's a whole other ugly
Yes.
that opens after that, right?
Yes. Yeah. Here it's like in California, we use the word conservatorship would be required. It's a lot of pieces. And yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we're setting up our estate plan, not only does it help that transition so much more, but from a financial perspective, a headache perspective, I mean, it's the difference between being able to carry out your parents' final wishes or needing to go to court and get permission and make your best guess. So I
Yeah.
love that that's part of your list because it's very much part of, and the reason why I launched this podcast is very much with that, front and top of mind for families.
I think that, families just don't realize that although thinking about what their loved ones, so if we look at the adult children, thinking about what their loved ones may need, thinking about the fact that mom or dad is now in the care aspect and you're kind of parenting your parent at that point, all of it is uncomfortable. The weird conversations we have to have in elder care about incontinence, about death, about all of it. Nobody wants to have these things and nobody wants to talk about powers of attorney and things like that. And
Hmm.
that's all well and good. I understand that it's like a gross territory. You have to really intentionally make time for it. But what I'm like to make sure the families do understand is that the other side of that coin of not planning and not doing it is way uglier.
Yeah, that's so true.
It's hard to get it across because most of us, even including myself, we like to learn the hard way. And unless you're actually feeling how difficult it is, it's hard to just take someone's word that it's going to be worse. But usually it is, because usually that includes a crisis, a hospital stay, having to take time off work, having to be the caregiver, staying on couches, all of the stuff, getting different like legal proceedings for powers of attorneys that haven't been put in place. All of that stuff is much more time consuming, much more ugly and involved. And those are kind of the situations where people go from adult children and lovingly taking care of to their loved ones to being resentful and just get this
Yeah.
off my plate, because it goes on and on and on. And eventually you have to throw your hands up and say, I just need this off my plate. And we don't want our clients there. We don't want our families there. So really understanding that planning will make a significant difference.
Oh, absolutely. I love that that's, front of mind for you as well.
Yeah.
We're in good company.
Well, and we've seen so many people in crisis, right? And like to your point at the first of our talk, right? There's not a lot of people that come to us to plan, although we have programs in place and we want them to do it. We encourage them to plan. Not a lot of people do that. And anybody that does do that most often has seen it happen somewhere else. And they're like, oh, I don't want that to happen to me. And then they'll
Yeah.
plan. But
Yeah, I see that also in my practice as well. It's
yeah,
usually the people that have like administered their parents' estates, and have seen firsthand the time and the stress and, the emotional burden that that takes of why they choose to work with a professional, that
yeah.
they don't want to put their children in that position. So I find that as well. So are you primarily focused on serving people through basically leaving the home, or even in that in between kind of period? Because sometimes what I'll find is, okay, the client, like let's just say the parent might need support, doing laundry, support doing errands, that kind of point in their aging process, and living at home is working for them. Are there resources for family, or you're primarily serving once families know that that move is needed? That's when you come in and can consult and advise on kind of the best scenario.
When we're planning with people, we'll talk about everything. We'll talk about home safety, we'll talk about home care, we'll talk about timing. We'll talk about, hey, maybe you shouldn't have your laundry in the basement anymore. Is there a better place to put it? It depends on everybody's situation because they're so different. But we'll do a combination. We'll educate them on what we have. We'll give them resources to companies that can home care, building, whoever it is, to fix what's going on there so they can stay home, because all of us want to stay home as long as possible. But there is a line to when your home does not work for you anymore, right?
Yeah.
It's fine, if you have stairs and you're having a trouble getting up them and you use a stair lift, that works. It works
Hmm.
until it doesn't work, right? And so it's important to give all those referrals, give all that advice, and then also make the plan. Okay, when this doesn't work any longer, what are we going to do then? Right? What is your next step? Because sometimes people get stuck in it. It's like, well, it's not really working, but like, I'm too scared to say something. I don't want to move. Therefore, I'm just going to make this work. But then they're going to end up falling. They're going to end up in some sort of weird crisis that they may not even get to return to their house.
Do you have kind of a few Do you have like a trigger points, or these are things to look out for when living at home might no longer be working?
Yes and no, right? We have, there's a lot of trigger points, right? It depends on who it is.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
also depends, though, on their budget. It depends on their social connections, also. Depends
Yeah.
on, just where they're living, how they're getting their groceries, how they're getting out, all of that stuff. Are they getting to appointments? Can they do medications? All of it. And so looking at people holistically has really been where we're at usually, and saying, okay, like this plan will work, but you need these three pieces taken care of. How are you going to do those three pieces? And so we can put it together with them, because again, not nobody has the same plan, and you really have to be very specific. Okay, you're having a medication problem, but your memory's okay, but you're not really in the routine maybe of taking those medications. Where's the reminders? Where's, Google or
Hmm.
Alexa? Like, where are the dosette packages? How do we make this easier for you, with the end goal being you get to stay in your house if you can get this down and doing it properly, because the other side of that is if you don't feed yourself properly, you do your medications properly, you have a bunch of throw rugs, laundry in the basement, lots of stairs, like all of these things. The other side is you're going to get yourself in trouble when it could have been an easy fix, right? But you have to pay attention to those small things too.
You paint such a accurate picture. I find that too with my clients. And one of my clients who's now passed away, I got involved and never married, no children, so kind of a solo ager. And anyways, basically had a huge decline. And what was happening was she was at home, she would fall, get hospitalized, then go to rehab, get discharged, go back home again. It took her 3 rounds of that before I started working with her. And where it just gets even more crazy is that she lived on the 3rd story, no elevator, and this is where, I think our healthcare system, I think it has failed us, but it's like discharges, they're not looking at that piece of, okay, when you do go home,
Mm.
what is that setup like? And that's where bringing in specialists and consultants to support families, I think, is just so needed. I love the work that you're doing because that piece, I mean, she should have not gone home. This
Yeah.
woman, I mean, her car was so banged up. She really could not, move around without a walker. And honestly, it became a wheelchair by the time I started working with her. And so, instead of, being proactive when it feels like she would get a say and have a choice, basically the choice was already made for her.
Yeah.
And it was just so much loss. It's so hard when you start working with people and it's like they've just lost everything. Their ability to move, their house, their belongings were having to downsize. And so anyways, this is where and so much of why I love having conversations like this and meeting people upstream where it's
Mhm.
like, no, pretending that this won't happen to you is really not serving you or your loved ones. If we can really kind of look at holistically the plan from, what is your community and what is your house set up and can we even set this house up safely? That's going to look very different, obviously, for each person.
Well, and I think that to your point, like we obviously as well look at individuals holistically. And I think that private sector does that better.
Yeah.
I'm sure you have very similar struggles. We constantly have struggles between silos, between public and private healthcare. Sometimes people don't even have the information, they're just discharged, right? But when they are, I believe, fortunate to end up with one of us or somebody like us, we can look at their whole situation and we can say, okay, like let's make a plan for everybody. Because when they're coming from hospital, for instance, the plan is them and them alone. It doesn't include the spouse who's caregiving. It doesn't include their dog,
Hmm.
their cat, their daughter, anybody. It doesn't include really like where they're living. Sometimes it will include that a little bit, but there's so many things that are missed as an individual. And it really takes a professional like us a couple of minutes to see actually a whole picture, and then we can work with it. It doesn't take that extra, it doesn't take too much extra time to really say, okay, who else is involved in this care journey? Who else do we have to consider?
Wow.
What else
Yeah.
is happening, right? Those extra questions take 30 seconds, and then you can do a better discharge plan or you can do a better care plan. But there's always been these silos, and it's very, very tricky as private businesses. And I think that's also why I've always led with education. I've been in this field 20 years and I curate all of our education on our platform. And, it's really important that people have, blogs and things like that. But we also have courses and we have webinars and we have downloads and we have estate planners and all sorts of stuff because they help people think out this journey and really plan for it.
I love that. I mean, in the US, what we find is that Medicare really only covers, I always forget the exact number of days, but it's like 24 or 28 days in the hospital. And so that's where you find that, that's always when people are getting discharged because that's the only amount that insurance covers. And it, obviously if people needed to be in care that long, but that's, that one client that I was sharing about where it was like, oh, so Medicare's only covering that much. So now we're going to discharge her and send her home. Anyways, it's very upsetting when I see that. That's just where the advocate in me wants to just go fight.
That's right, right? It's super upsetting for, I mean, the family, for everybody, but as professionals in this field and with experience that we have, and we've seen this happen over and over and over, and you just want to shake the healthcare system, right? You want to
Yeah.
be able to tell people, hey, this is just not how it should be going, but it's very difficult. And so the best we do as private providers is pick up the pieces, put them back together, and get them to the
Yeah.
best situation we can get them to when they come to us.
Well, I feel like this is just going perfectly into your book, Bread Crumbs. We touched upon why so much of your business, Tea and Toast, is, the foundation is really educating families and being that hub and resource. So let's talk about the book. What inspired you to, write a book, spend the time? I'm assuming, it's kind of all the things that we're talking about now.
Yeah, it really is all those things. I didn't expect to be an author. That's not where my forte was, but I just felt really compelled to put the amount of knowledge that we have in bite-sized, pieces, of course, but really to give them direction. And this is the second edition of this book because I really wanted to speak more from a caregiver care perspective, caring for them, caring for
Mm,
their loved one, as opposed to my first version, which was very more Ottawa retirement based, like very specific. And so I brought in my audience so that people could use this book wherever they are in the world. Definitely, there's some, as any writer, wherever you're from, there's going to be examples from your own country. But the book is really broadened so that families can grab it where they're at. And so I find that a lot of people don't want to talk to us, right? Don't want to talk to you, don't want to talk to me, don't want to talk to anybody about
yeah.
it. They're just hunkering down and trying to get through it, which is fine. They're not ready for us yet. But just like the free education that we have on our website, the book is there too. And so the book's just like this really soft touch of, hey, maybe you want to consider some of this stuff. Maybe you need some direction on how to have these talks or, how to, navigate the generational differences and how you're now caring for your adult, parent, like the other way around, right? So the book is really a non-offensive way to be like, hey, let me into your living room and talk to you and read this on your own time. And none of us need to know that you're doing it. Keep it to yourself. It's a door opener for people so they can see, one, they're not alone, and two, there are people out there that care, that understand that journey, that we all know what they're going through, but it's hard to find us sometimes, right? Because I don't think that they're in our history, especially in Canada, but I'm guessing in the US, I don't think there's been a lot of focus on seniors, on family caregivers, on transition at the end of life. And we're just getting there and we're already overwhelmed and we haven't even dealt with any of it yet, right? Like there's so many coming through the system.
Well, there's so many, I think pieces too. It's also people are living longer, right?
Yeah. We
Living
never had that before.
longer. And also families. I mean, I'm sure that's the same is true in Canada as the US. Families have really kind of dispersed. So we're no longer are we just living in a small town and living in community and, close to each other. I mean, the plan for care is going to obviously change and it's going to look radically different if you have two or three children that live, down the street from you versus, oh, I have one child that's a top executive living in Japan and another child that's, on the opposite coast. Care for mom and dad is going to look radically different with that scenario. And that's what I'm finding in my practice. Of course, I'm based in Silicon Valley and, I think the population here is probably going to look slightly unique and diverse, but for the most part, I think that families just aren't really living as close and connected. Plus, more and more people are choosing not to have kids or have fewer children.
To that point, there's also the changing family values of,
Yeah.
different cultures used to take their loved ones in. They still do, but more and more those same cultures
Oh, yeah.
are also expanding where they live and expanding what they do. And when the work looks different and all of it looks different, now they're looking at maybe looking at assisted living or whatnot. And I'll tell you, the other problem with that part of it is that there's a stigma around it because
Mm.
we already have enough stigma around retirement living, long-term care, assisted living, all of that, right? Nobody wants to talk about it. There's a big stigma. But when you also add in the cultural perspective, those folks, whatever background they happen to be in, they also may not be doing things like their friends are doing. Their friends may be caring for their loved one because that's what you do, right? In the culture. But this couple, for instance, is not caring for their loved one because they can't or because they don't want to, which is super valid too. And they want to be able to set them up in a better circumstance that everybody is getting the care they need, everybody's happy without anybody feeling like they have to do something.
Oh, I love that you said that. I mean, so my husband is Persian.
Mm,
And when we had our daughter, his mom came up for a few nights and met her. But just hearing about her life and her story of having her babies, which are
mm,
now, grown men, it was exactly that. It was completely different. The women gathered, her mom moved in, did all the cooking. She had three sisters. And so there were a lot of helping hands and also information being passed down kind of from that next generation. And I think we're kind of like in these in between times right now. Of course, it's wonderful to romanticize the past, but I also saw the downside of that. It's like, okay, well, your kind of information is really kind of only based on, that one person or family system. And where now, as parents, we have Google. And so we have all this information at our resources of, whether we're doing sleep training or, whatever. We can gather that in and then really kind of curate and create what that, care plan looks like. Obviously, I'm explaining for a child, but I think the same can be true. And, that obligation, that expectation that, mom and dad are going to automatically live with you, that comes with a huge burden and a lot of pain and resentment. And I mean, that's real. And who's that burden on? More times than not, it's the daughters, right? The women that are doing this care. So, as much as, I think we're going through the growing pains right now where we haven't quite figured it out, it's a little bit of both of finding the community, creating this plan, and also leaning on the resources that are available, whether it's public or private, or creating that team. But I think this kind of assumption that you're going to live with home. I think most of us can agree that's not true for most families anymore. So what are we going to do about it? Right?
and Sarah, don't forget, right? There are more people now coming back home. More kids are coming back home. And now we've got a whole bunch
Yeah.
of sandwich generation people that have everybody living with them and all the care they have to worry about. And to your point, it usually comes down on one individual. And then nobody's taking care of that person's mental health either. And they can't take care of it, right? And because they're caring for, multiple generations, I've had people say that they were sandwich generation, but I've had other people say that they were like double decker. I can't remember what she called it because she was caring for her kid, her mom, and her husband. And it's like,
Oh,
it's just nonstop, right? And so
yeah.
as we all adjust, new things come into our playing field that weren't a thing before. And so now we're living longer, which is great. That means that you're caring for people longer.
Longer.
And now
Yeah.
the kids can't afford to stay out any longer. They can't afford houses, they can't afford whatever. And they're coming
Hmm.
home and so they're there too. And so it's just this weird dynamic that's happening where everybody needs care, and the person that's caring for them, generally speaking, in a household scenario, isn't actually getting the care either. And so there's burnout all over the place.
Oh, well, I love the work that you're doing. We'll absolutely include kind of all the links of where to find you and Tea and Toast and of course Bread Crumbs. I'm definitely going to pick up a copy. I can't wait to read it.
Thank you.
I did not know it was a second edition, so I applaud you for doing not only writing a book, but then also doing it again, right?
Well, we all grow as people, right? And I just wanted to keep the education aspect up of it. And I learn new things. There's three years between editions, and I learn new things. things, and they work with our families, and so we want to pass that knowledge on so other people can get help even if they're not in a place where they want to bring another expert in.
And also, so much has changed since COVID. I'm finding specifically with care. So I'm sure that that just makes so much sense. Well, Amy, I really want to thank you for coming on the podcast today. I've taken away so much from this conversation. If there's one thing you would like listeners to leave with, what would that be?
I would say that to know that you're not alone. It's kind of my calling card at this point, I think, because it's so important that people realize that they're literally not the only one struggling. It feels like it, don't get me wrong. It does feel like it. It feels like that in all of our lives, right? Which is probably why people like you and I are such hard advocators of like, okay, we need to make sure we're getting everything right because we all feel kind of lonely in doing these care journeys. But if there's one thing I've noticed when you share, pieces of your own journey with people, which is a lot about what I do as well, there's more people that understand what you're going through than don't.
Oh, absolutely. I love that, Amy. I want to thank you again, and I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day.
Thanks, Sarah. Take care.